To spend this moment with you, whether you're worshiping with us online or whether you're here in this room. Glad to spend this moment with you. There is no greater comfort to me than to know that I have a heavenly Father like the one we read about in Psalm 103, one that is slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, not dealing with me like I deserve, for I make many mistakes, but loving and compassionate like a father for us. I want to say Happy Father's Day to all of you. We love our fathers and our grandfathers. We love our father figures in this church, our fathers-in-law. And as a church, we want to say thank you for all that you do, all that you are to us. And today's lesson, in many ways, for all of us, is inspired by that fact. You know, the preacher in me, the planner of me, thinks it's kind of a shame to have started a series in Esther 1 week ago, only to pause that series today, 1 week later, but that is what we're going to do today. Somehow it just didn't feel right to preach that next lesson in Esther, the one on Haman, the villain of Esther, on Father's Day. Didn't seem like quite the best way to honor our fathers. I can hear some of our fathers now saying, "Hey man, not cool." Hey man, not cool. You thought I wouldn't have a dad joke on Father's Day? There's one for you. But since I didn't really want to do Haman on Father's Day, it kind of left me with a wide open choice of what to preach about today. And it occurred to me that perhaps on a day like today, when we honor our fathers, on a day like today, when we challenge us, all of us, that perhaps we should turn to the story of the life of Moses. And for some of you, that may seem like an obvious choice. One of the things that I love to do each Father's Day is turn to the story of a great man of God, a great man of faith, and look at what we can learn from their lives. David, for one, has been one of my favorites to turn to. But who is there in the Bible who represents that larger-than-life, ideal figure of faith more than a man like Moses, right? I mean, here is a man who is sort of the human figure of God's grand showdown with Pharaoh in Egypt. Here's a man who leads God's people, Israel, to freedom from captivity, and in the way that nobody would have ever dreamed. They walk through the Red Sea on dry ground. They watch as their enemies wash away behind them. Here's a man whose very hand etched the 10 Commandments into stone. Here's a man who his very face literally glowed because he had seen the Lord more clearly and more closely than anybody before him ever had. He's a man of courage, a man of principle, a man who stood up for his people, a man who stood for God even when he stood alone. Could there be a more larger-than-life figure than Moses, right? We all look up to Moses. And Moses probably seems like an obvious choice for a day like today. But today I want to take a different approach to Moses. Our stories from Scripture come from his life story. But today I would like for us to focus not on Moses, that larger-than-life figure, but instead on the lesser-known, behind-the-scenes fathers who saved his life. That is, his father and his father-in-law. I'm guessing probably not that many of us even remember their names, right? But Moses certainly remembers what these men did for him, the difference they made in his life. And today, I wonder if all of us might learn something from their stories, especially our fathers. What can we learn today from those behind-the-scenes difference makers who spent so little time in the spotlight, and yet they could not be more important? And their lives and the difference they made is certainly not forgotten. So today I want to look at their stories. And the first of these father figures, Moses' actual father, we meet, as you might expect, at the beginning of Moses' life, and that's in the book of Exodus. If you'd like to get out a Bible and be turning there, Exodus chapter 2 is where we first meet Moses' father, though we have to wait several more chapters before we even learn his name. In fact, were it not for a few lists of names, like, we find those in some places in the Bible, a few lists of names in Exodus and in Numbers, we might not even know his name at all. But we do. His name is Amram. And isn't that just an awesomely manly name, Amram? It's like the mixture of a train and a Dodge pickup, Amram. That's Moses' father. To my knowledge, he only shows up one time. Only in one story do we actually learn anything about this man, Amram, Moses' father. And even then, in that story, in Exodus chapter 2, he's simply introduced to us as a man of the house of Levi, who married a woman, a Levite woman, and who in turn gave birth to a son. And that is just about all of the time that the book of Exodus spends talking specifically about Amram, father of Moses. And yet, even though he spends no time in the spotlight, one of the few things we do know about Amram is that he plays a part in saving Moses' life. And the way that he does that is by facing a difficult decision and facing it by faith. So the man from the house of Levi married a Levite woman. They gave birth to a son. But no sooner had that young boy arrived into their lives than they were met with a problem, right? The Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, having fear in his hearts for how many Hebrew people were popping up in his country, made a decree. And he said, every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile. And here is Amram and his wife Jochebed. They're holding their young baby boy in their arms. What are they going to do? What are they going to do with this problem that they face? Well, I don't know what this particular family meeting was like. And I certainly don't know what precisely it is that helps them to decide to do what they ultimately choose to do. But many of you know the story. After hiding the young boy for as long as they possibly could, his mother placed young Moses into a basket and then placed that basket by the reeds on the river bank. And as his older sister, watched from far away, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and when she opened it, she saw the child there. And behold, the baby was crying. And then we have this moment of tender humanity. She took pity on him. She said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." And she named him Moses because, she said, "I drew him out of the water." And then comes the very best twist of all. For a moment, this woman, the daughter of Pharaoh, actually gives Moses back to his real parents. So you remember how Moses' sister is standing and watching nearby. Well, very cleverly, when the daughter of Pharaoh finds Moses in the river, she speaks up and says, "Well, shall I go and get you one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" And the daughter of Pharaoh says, "Yes, go." So the girl goes, and who does she get? Moses' own mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said, "Take this baby, take care of this baby. I'll even pay you to do it." So the woman, Moses' mother, took baby Moses and nursed him. But eventually, as you know, when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And as I read this, I can hardly imagine what all of this must have been like for Amram and for Jochebed, for the father and the mother of young Moses, because here they have faced and continue to face the most difficult choice that I can imagine any parents facing here in this bizarre situation. Will they do what it takes to do what's best for their son, even when it hurts them? Like even when it costs so much. Here's this father and this mother. We know so little about them, but they face this difficult decision. And what I would like to point out today is that they face this difficult decision by faith. A few weeks ago, we were looking at the book of Hebrews. We looked at Hebrews chapter 11, the chapter that talks about all those great heroes of faith. Moses' parents are among them. We know so little about them. They are among those heroes of faith in that chapter. Both father and mother, they're mentioned here. The reason they're mentioned is because when they face the hardest decision of their lives, they face that decision by faith. And I wonder today, when we face hard decisions, will we do the same? Because I think it is easy, because I have done it myself, to sometimes, in the heat of the moment, when push comes to shove, kind of just push faith out to the margins of the decisions that we make. And we all have decisions that we make, big ones and small ones. They often affect more than just ourselves. Decisions about where to live, decisions about what we're going to do, decisions about how you're going to parent in your home or what your marriage is going to be like, decisions about who you will keep as company, who you'll keep as friends, decisions about what you're going to do if crisis strikes in your life. And it can be easy when faced with those decisions to sort of let faith fall to the periphery rather than allowing faith in God, our commitment to His ways, our obedience to His will, to be like the fulcrum of our decision-making process, the center of our choices. But here we have a father and mother, and they face the hardest decision, but they face it in faith. And it wasn't easy, was it? And yet, this father and mother, who we know so little about, they end up saving the life of the one who will later save the lives of God's people. And they did that by faith. And today, I would say to all of us here this morning and all of us who are in many places listening to this story, when push comes to shove, where does faith fit into our decision making? Where does faith fit into our choices? Especially to our fathers today. Are we going to guide our families in faith, making faith-informed choices, those of you who are fathers? When you do that, when you're able to keep faith at the center of your family's choices, it may not put you in the spotlight, but your influence, like Amram, will not be forgotten. Because Amram faced a hard decision, and he faced it by faith. Well, days go by, and they turn to years. Actually, decades pass between that day when Amram and Jochebed made that faithful decision on the riverbank. And as decades pass, Moses becomes the man we know he will be. He learns to stand up tall and stand on the doorstep of Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." He leads the people following that pillar of cloud and that pillar of fire to freedom. But a funny thing happens when they get across the sea and into freedom, and Pharaoh is now long gone. The funny thing is, life for Moses the leader, it's not so easy still. Still a pretty tough road he's walking down, even after they're free from Egypt. Got a whole nation of people here. Nothing to eat or drink. And the people complain. Oh, they complain. And the Lord provides. He gives them bread from heaven. The people complain. He gives them water from the rock. The people complain. And then the cycle goes on. And all of a sudden, Moses is just kind of like in the middle of all of these problems. He's a man with 1,000 problems. He's got this really heavy burden on his shoulders. And that is when a second father figure comes to the rescue. This is not his father, Amram. Instead, it's his father-in-law this time. And this time, this father figure doesn't save his physical life, but he just might save his spiritual one. It's in Exodus chapter 18, if you want to turn there as well. And it's there in Exodus chapter 18 where we meet Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. No, it's not that Jethro, not the cereal-eating Beverly Hillbilly. And it's also not this Jethro either. Danny Glover is not going to break into through heaven's eyes like in the Prince of Egypt in Exodus 18. The father-in-law of Moses, Jethro, does something way, way less glamorous than that, but still so important. You see, in those days, Moses was not only leading his people to the promised land, but he was also leading his people in so many other ways. And one of the ways that he was leading the people was as their judge. Moses would sit and serve as the judge over all of the different disputes and squabbles, great and small, the lawsuits, the crimes, anything that came up amongst their people. Moses was the one adjudicating and deciding what to do with all these different situations. Moses is trying to do it all. He's trying to do even more than Moses can do, if you can imagine. And in chapter 18, verse 13, we read that Moses would take his seat and serve as judge for the people, and they would stand around him from morning to evening. From morning to evening, he's just surrounded with people's problems. From morning to evening, they're just bringing to them their disputes and their concerns and saying, solve this for me. And this is on top of all of his other responsibilities, like leading the people to the promised land. All these things are on Moses' shoulders in the wilderness. In fact, in verses 2 and 3 and 4, we read that Moses at some point even sent his wife and his children to go and live with his father-in-law, Jethro. And we wonder if it's because from morning till evening and late into the night, he's just spread so thin. Just got so much on his plate. But you know what Jethro does? Verse 5, Jethro brings Moses' wife and his sons back to Moses. And they greet each other. They go into the tent together. Moses begins to tell Jethro, his father-in-law, about all the amazing things that the Lord has done to save them time and time again. And Jethro praises the Lord for this. Moses tells him everything, and Jethro is delighted to hear about all the things that the Lord has done. He says, praise be to the Lord. Jethro even offers a sacrifice to the Lord, the one true God. It's kind of interesting. When we first meet Jethro, he's introduced to us as a priest of Midian. But somehow, through Moses, he seems to have come to know the Lord. He offers a sacrifice to the Lord here. And they eat a meal together. And then, Jethro sees Moses working. He witnesses Moses sitting as judge from morning until evening, and what does he do? Jethro says to Moses, what you are doing is not good. And do you imagine what Moses wants to say in response to that? I think I know what I would say in response to that. Excuse me? Come again, please? All I do is good from morning to night. All I do is deal with everybody's problems. They're all bringing them to me. All I do is try to help all of these people. I don't stop doing good. What do you mean what I'm doing is not good? But what does Jethro mean? Jethro sees something that Moses doesn't see. Jethro sees that Moses is not larger than life. Jethro also sees his family. And his family needs him too. And even though Moses may be able to play Superman for a while, eventually there's a price to pay for that. So Jethro says, you and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me. I'll give you some advice, and may God be with you. And the advice that Jethro gives to Moses is, don't stop being judged. They need you for that. But don't do it alone. Don't shoulder this burden by yourself. Share the load. Surround yourself with good people who can help to carry this burden for you. Then you'll be free to do the things that matter the most. Then your load will be lighter because they share it. And if you do this, you will be able to stand the strain. You see, here we have Moses at a moment when he is just on a crash course toward burning out. And all of his priorities are getting out of whack. And sure, he's trying to do good for so many people. And yet, this father figure in his life has the discernment to see what matters most. And he's able to share that wisdom with Moses in a way that he could hear. Remember all those things Jethro did with Moses before he shares this good word? Can't help but notice he sits with Moses. He delights in his successes and in his stories. He worships alongside Moses. He breaks bread with Moses at his table. He even takes care of his family as well. And then, within that relationship, he gently speaks the truth that Moses needs to hear. And I also can't help but notice that when Jethro goes home at the end of the chapter, he appears to go home alone. Like, remember, he brought, Moses' family was living with him, and he brought them with him to Moses, but now as he goes back home, he seems to go back home alone. It's like Jethro has helped to restore Moses' family to him by restoring his priorities. And doing that in love. And that is the power of a spiritually grounded person. That's the kind of person we all need in our lives. I have a preacher friend who talks about people like Jethro as compass people. That's what he calls them, compass people. Says everybody needs 2 or 3 compass people in your life. These are the kind of people that are, they've got a good read on true north. And they love you enough and they know you enough that they haven't lost sight of what matters most, and they're going to help you to see it too. And what greater role can fathers play in their families' lives than to be that compass person in your families? To be like Jethro in this story. Ephesians tells fathers not to exasperate their children. We know that. But Jethro offers discernment and love. He is a guiding light to Moses. And what I love about these fathers, both of them, Amram and Jethro, is that neither one of them really seeks the spotlight. Neither one of them really spends much time at center stage. Neither one of them really does anything larger than life. But talk about some difference makers. Talk about some life savers, these two. And it's all because they were making hard decisions by faith, like Amram does. And it's because they were sharing the wisdom of what matters most in love, like Jethro does. And through these things, they are being what a father is meant to be, putting their children first, being like a compass in their family. It is true that selfless acts often don't get the spotlight. It is also true that sometimes a compass is ignored, but that doesn't stop a compass from pointing to the north. And it also doesn't stop a father like Jethro and like Amram and like so many of you from sharing your faith and your wisdom and your love with your families and all the other people within your reach. And those things that you do are not forgotten. We thank you for all of those things. And we also challenge you. Really, today I'd like to challenge all of us, starting with myself, to consider, when I make a decision, do I make it in faith? Or do I kind of just put faith to the side? Is faith at the center of my choices? And what about you? And today I'd like to challenge all of us to consider also, can I be that compass person for someone in my life? Or do I need one? Do I need to find one? Because we all need people that we can count on to love you and help you to see the way to go. We all need that. Thankfully, in Jesus Christ, we have the greatest compass person you can find. Not only did he set the example for us, but he also shed his blood for us. And through his word, we know that when we are washed in his blood and raised up anew, we can walk in his footsteps in a new life. We can follow the path that he leads us on. We know that Christ selflessly surrendered center stage in heaven to be a servant among us. And we know that Christ was always helping others to see what matters most. Today, maybe you need those things in your life. Today, perhaps you need to respond to this lesson. We offer a chance to do that now as we stand and as we sing.